What's up guys, and welcome back to a new video, which will be a 12 episode video series where we will be diving into Laravel Nova. Quick pause. Do you want to support the channel and want me to continue on creating content? Well, you can support the channel on Patreon right now, where you get benefits such as a private Discord group where you can share your coding issues and other developers will help you out. If you are interested to join, the link can be found in the description down below. Laravel Nova is a beautiful admin panel created by the developers of Laravel itself, which can be added into Laravel applications. I'm going to be clear once by saying that most of the steps that we will be performing during this course will be from the official documentation of Nova itself, which will be linked in the description down below. Besides that, I'll be tweaking some functionalities here and there. Laravel Nova has a couple requirements that you should be aware of before installing it, but you most likely will be familiar with most of them. We will be using Laravel Nova 4, meaning that you need to have a Laravel project where the version is 8 or higher. It also makes use of Node and npm, where the Node version needs to be 14 or higher. Whenever you want to install Laravel Nova, you need to install it inside a Laravel project. It's not required to start from scratch, since you can add it inside an existing project as well. You do need to keep in mind that certain routes that Nova uses could override routes that you defined beforehand. An example might be the login endpoint of Laravel Breeze. Laravel Nova uses Sanctum, so you can't use an authentication that doesn't use Sanctum. Now we're going to start off from scratch, so we got to make sure that we create a default Laravel project first. I'm currently located inside the command line interface, where I'm going to create a new Laravel project by running the Laravel new product dashboard. Now this creates a new Laravel project, but not Laravel Nova. This needs to be done inside our project directory. So let's change directories by saying cd product dashboard. Nova needs to be installed as a composer package through a private repository, since it's a paid product from Laravel. So there are two methods in how you could do this. I've already opened my project inside PHPStorm, so I want to navigate to it, where we need to add the Nova repository inside our composer.json file. The other method is a little bit easier, where we need to set it up through the CLI, but it's easier to make mistakes right now, so I'll just add the command inside the description. Like I've mentioned before, we need to add a Nova repository inside our composer.json file. So let's open it, where we need to define a new section right below our require def called repositories, and let's set it equal to an array. Inside the array, we're going to add curly braces, where we need to add a basically key value pair right here, where the first one is type with a value of composer, while the second one will be URL, where the value will be https ://nova.laravel.com. We're almost done right here. We're going to add Nova as a requirement inside our project, which needs to be done right at the top inside our require section, where you'll see some other requirements such as the PHP version, the Guzzle, framework, Sanctum, and Tinker. So let's go right after Tinker, add a comma, where we will be adding a new package from Laravel, / and the package name is Nova. Then we need to add the version, which will be tilde, which stands for the next significant release of 4.0. Alright, we're ready to run Composer updates so that Composer recognizes the Nova package we just added manually, which needs to be done right inside of the CLI. We're going to run the Composer update command, but we're going to add the -- prefer -dist option right here, which basically downloads and unzips the dependencies that we added from Nova. If we hit enter, you'll see that it is loading the dependencies. Alright, our package has been added, but it didn't install Nova itself. We need to make sure that we install Nova and run our migrations. But before we could do that, we need to set up our database and add our credentials inside the .env file. So inside the CLI, we're going to run the MySQL command to create our database first by saying create database named product _dashboard. Let's hit enter. Alright. MySQL prompted us with a message saying that one row has been affected, meaning that our database has been created. We don't need MySQL anymore, so we could simply perform an exit right here. Before we could migrate our database, we need to make sure that we set up our database credentials inside the .env file. So let's do that. Right here, my password is Dari1234. My database name is product _dashboard, and my username is root. Before we migrate our tables, I do want to add a simple user rule inside the user migration, which we will be using later on, where we're going to work with authorizing users with a certain type to certain actions. So let me search for my create users table. All right. Right under my password, I'm going to create a table boolean, which will be is_admin, and it has a default of false. We are ready to migrate our migrations. So let's navigate back to iTerm and let's run the PHP artisan migrate command. As you could see, it has run our migrations. So finally, we're ready to install Laravel Nova inside our project by running PHP artisan Nova :install. This has done a couple things for us. It first published the Nova assets. It has published the Nova service provider inside the providers directory. It has created a dashboard for us. It has generated the user's resource based on the user model and migration. And the Nova scaffolding has been installed successfully. Now let's have a look at the routes that has been created for us through the PHP artisan route list command. We're not going to cover all these routes, but since we're going to work inside an admin panel, we need to have some kind of login or register route where we could either log in or create an account which we can use to log in. As you could see, right at the top, it has a Nova/login endpoint, which is a GET request, and it has a Nova/login endpoint, which will be a POST request, where it will handle the login functionality. Let's run valet link inside the CLI so we could open our project locally. Let me add my password. All right, a symbolic link has been created. So let's navigate to Google Chrome, and inside the URL, let's go to product-dashboard.test. Right here, you will find the default Laravel welcome screen. And if we change our URL to /Nova/login, you'll see that we have been prompted with Nova's login screen. This also indicates that the installation worked and Nova has been installed into our project. Since we're working with an admin panel, Laravel Nova doesn't have a register route because not any user should be allowed to create an account and log in. This should either happen inside the dashboard or through Nova, its command that you could run through the CLI to create a new user inside the users table. So let's navigate back to iTerm for a moment and let's run the PHP artisan command first. If we scroll up to the command starting with the letter N, right here, you'll find a complete list of commands that Nova has created for us. We won't be covering these right now, but during this course, you'll get familiar with most of them. The command that we need for this example is the Nova user command, right at the bottom, which will basically create a new user for us through the CLI. So let's run it. Let's say PHP artisan Nova user. It's asking us for a name, so let's say code with Dari. It's asking us for an email, which will be info@darinuzar.com, and it's asking us for a password, which will be my secret password. As you could see, it has prompted us with a message saying that the user has been created successfully. And if we navigate back to the browser right now and try to log in right here with the user credentials we just created through the CLI, click on login. And right here, you'll see that we have been redirected to the Nova dashboard. We will cover the dashboard later on during the series, but for now, we're going to cover the interface of Nova first. At the top, you'll find a logo right here of Laravel Nova. And next to it, you'll see unregistered, since we haven't added our credentials for Nova. We have a search bar. Now Nova supports dark mode and light mode, which you can toggle right here, which in my opinion is a huge feature that has been added in Nova 4. You'll see a bell right here for notifications. And you have the username right here, where you can log out. Now inside the sidebar, we have our user's resource, which is basically generated based on the user's model and a migration, but we will cover this later on. If we click on it, you'll see a table right here, where you basically find all resource operations. You can create a user, delete a user, edit a user, and view a user, and you even have the option to replicate it. So this basically means that all CRUD operations have been created for the user's resource. Now that we have access to Nova's dashboard, I want to dive into some important configuration and customization before we continue on. We haven't added our Nova credentials yet, and you'll see that right next to the logo it says unregistered. Now keep in mind that this step is optional. Even though you can use Nova locally, you do need to add your credentials once you want to deploy this project. So what I want to do first is adding Nova its credentials to show you how you could get rid of this ugly unregistered text in the top left corner. If you open a new tab and navigate to nova.laravel.com, click on Login. Well, you'll see that I'm already logged in. And right inside of the menu, you'll see an option where you can click on Licenses. If you have made a purchase from their site, you'll see a site right here where you could click on. Once you do that, you could create a new license key in the bottom right. Do that, copy the license key, and I'll see you back in the .env file where we need to define a new environment variable. Nova has a configuration file inside the config directory where you could add your Nova license key directly as a key value pair. I'd rather use a .env file for it, because there might be a chance where we need it at multiple places. And you also don't want to share your credentials with others. So let's define a new environment variable right above our database credentials with the name of Nova underscore license underscore key. And the value needs to be set equal to the license that we just copied. The Nova license key environment variable will be used inside the config directory. Let's open it, where you will find a new file called nova.php. Right here, you'll see that the Nova license key has been set equal to the environment variable of Nova license key that we just have set. Now there are two options on how you could check whether you have configured the Nova license key correctly. It has a CLI command for it, which is php artisan nova check-license, where Nova replies with a success message saying that the license key that we added is valid. The second method is actually the easiest one, and that's simply navigating back to the browser, refresh it, and right here. You'll see that unregistered has been removed right here because our license key has been set right now. Whenever you try to deploy a project that uses Nova, you need to add a bit more configuration in order for it to work. So let me show you how that works as well. Let's navigate back to PHP Store, and the easiest method is basically adding a new file inside the root of our directory, named auth.json. Now right here, we need to make sure that we add our Nova credentials. So follow along for a moment. Let's start off with curly braces. Then we have a http-basic, which is equal to curly braces, where we have the credentials of nova.laravel.com, which is equal to curly braces as well, where you need to define the username, which is the email you use to register your account on Laravel Nova. So info@darinazar.com. Then we have a password, which needs to be the license key that we just copied for our Nova license key environment variable. So let's paste it. And that's basically it. Once you deploy a project, you need to make sure that your auth.json file is included. Now, if we navigate back to our local host and take a look at the interface of Nova, you'll see that they decided to go with a primary color of blue, since it also works on light mode. Nova allows you to customize your primary color through the Nova configuration file as well. So let me actually go back to dark mode. Let's navigate back to PHP Storm, and right inside of our nova.php file, let's search for colors. Right here, you'll find a key value pair, let's uncomment it, of branding. So basically our logo and colors. When you want to change your primary colors, you have to specify the colors you want to use for your Nova dashboard as a RGB value right here. And there are 3 different values you could add. And if you're familiar with Tailwind CSS, you can basically tell what it means. 400, 500, 600. 600 is the darkest, 400 is the lightest. Even though it uses Tailwind for the front end, you can't add your Tailwind classes right here. So let's change the colors to yellow and follow along for a moment. The first one will be 250 to 204 and 21. The last one is the opacity, which we will set to 1. Then for our 500 color, it will be 234, 179, and the last one will be 8. Then for our 600 color, we will be 202 for red, the green one will be 138, and the blue one will be 4, and the opacity will be set to 1 as well. When we navigate to the browser, refresh it, you will see that the primary color of our Nova dashboard has been changed to yellow. The Create User button, the Moon toggle for light mode and dark mode, and the Powered by Laravel Nova, the ID, and the user resource. Within the brand array, At the top, you'll see that we could also customize Laravel Nova its logo. This needs to be done as an absolute path to an SVG file of the logo. So you can't use an URL right here instead of the resource path method. Instead of using a resource path, I'm going to use a public path, which will look inside a public directory where I'm going to create a new images subdirectory, and I'm going to add my personal logo, which will be cdw-logo.svg. If you want to use my logo as well, you could just open it inside the GitHub repository and drag it inside our images directory. I'll cut out the part where I'll add it inside the public directory. As you could see, my logo magically popped up inside my images directory. And if we navigate back to Google Chrome, refresh it, you'll see that my logo has been added inside the top left corner and it has overridden the default Laravel Nova logo. Another configuration that I'd like to change up is the URL endpoints, since I want to get rid of the /Nova endpoint right inside of the URL. When working on an application in production, I don't really see the point of using the /Nova endpoint. I do understand why they added it, but once you have set up your Laravel Nova project, it's pretty much unnecessary. This can be once again customized inside the Nova configuration file where we're located in. And let's search for path, which is right at the top. Right here, you'll see the URI from Nova, its API routes. You can see this pretty much as a prefix that can be added. So let's remove Nova right here, which changes our login endpoint from /Nova/login to login. If we navigate back to the browser, refresh it, you'll see that we've been prompted with a 404 because the page has not been found. And if we remove Nova from the URL, you'll see that we're back at our user's resource. If we navigate back to the CLI for a moment and run the php artisan route :list command, you'll see that Nova has been removed from all of our routes, except from the Nova API, of course. If for some reason you don't want to work with light mode or dark mode and you want the system preferences of a user's browser to decide which theme Nova should use, you need to call the without theme switcher method from the Nova service provider. Let's navigate back to PHP Storm and let's search for the Nova service provider, which is located inside the app directory where it has a subdirectory named providers. Now we need to make sure that we call the method inside our boot method, right below our parent boot. We're going to call it the Nova global class, : without theme switcher. If we navigate to the browser, refresh it, you'll see that in the top right corner, the theme toggler has been removed, and the system preferences of my Google Chrome browser is using dark mode by default. I'm personally a huge fan of dark mode, so I do want to have the option back. So let's navigate back and let's remove our without theme switcher method. The last configuration that I'd like to show you is changing up Laravel Nova its footer. At the moment, you're seeing a default footer right here that Nova has added by default. And with all due respect to the creators of Laravel, you don't want to have their names inside an admin panel that you will sell to a client. So let's change it up. When it comes to Nova, you have to overwrite the default footer that has been added right here. You can't just open a footer.blade.php file and make changes to it. If I navigate back to PHP Storm, to do a search through my entire application and search for powered by, which is basically the footer, you can see that the footer does exist, but if we take a closer look to the file name, right here, you'll find a cached file which you can't simply override. If you run the composer update command, it will delete your changes again. Therefore, Nova created a functionality where you could create your own footer inside the Nova service provider, where we are located right now. This can be done right inside of the boot method, where we need to call the Nova global class and adding the footer method to it. Now the footer method accepts a parameter, which will be a callback function, so function, where we will pass in the request. Then inside our footer, we could simply return a string right here of test. If we navigate back to Google Chrome, refresh it, you'll see that test has been printed out, but it kind of messed up our styling. The paragraph styling is the same, but it's aligned to the left right now. We should rather return the blade facade. So let's remove our string of test and let's call blade, pull it in, and add the static render method to it, which allows us to render a blade view from the resources directory. We're going to add a path right here of Nova footer. So let's define our path inside the resources directory, views directory, where we need to create a new directory first called Nova, with a new file inside of it called footer.blade.php. Now let's add simple markup right here. Let's start off with a div. Let's give it a class of text center. Let's add a paragraph with the text of this product, analytics dashboard has been powered by an anchor on the line below with my site to https blog.codewithdari.com. Inside our anchor, we're going to add the text of code with Dari. And right under our anchor, we're going to add a dot. Feel free to support him. We do need to add a class to our anchor, so let's outline it on the line below. And let's add a class of text yellow 600, hover text yellow 500, transition all, and finally the font is bold. If we navigate back to the browser, refresh it, you'll see that our custom footer.blade.php file has overridden the default footer of Nova. Now let's clean it up a little bit. Let's navigate back to our Nova service provider for a moment. I personally think that it doesn't look clean to add it directly inside the boot method, since we will be adding more and more inside the boot method because all of the magic needs to happen right here. It also looks a bit clustered if we add multiple customizations right here. So I personally prefer to make a private method of our Nova footer right here and call it instead. So what we could do is click on option cmd_m and let's refactor it by naming the method getFooterContent. Let's set the visibility to private and let's click on refactor. Alright, it has replaced it with this getFooterContent, meaning that a new method has been created right here. At the bottom, right here, a private function getFooterContent, which is basically returning the rendered blade. Now this was it for this episode where I introduced you to Laravel Nova. We did set it up together and we went over some custom configurations. In the next video, we will start defining our resources where we will be creating more resource functionalities. If you do like my content and you want to see more, leave this video a thumbs up. And if you're new to this channel, please hit that subscribe button.